Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me back for a second time. Glad I didn't, alienate all of you the first time I came to visit. So, real quick show of hands. How many of you have some kind of gratitude practice that you incorporate in your day-to-day existence? I kind of figured in this crowd that it would be a common thing. So for me, it's been a recent development, but it's become an integral part of my daily ritual. Whether I'm at home or at work, hiking in the woods, or sitting down at a coffee shop, I like to take time to pause and reflect on all the blessings in my life. The benefits of practicing gratitude are well documented. Improved physical and mental health, enhanced empathy, and higher self-esteem are just a few of the perks that can be found in the latest research. For me, the benefits extend far beyond these. I've even found benefit in searching for reasons to be grateful. Now, I have a lot to be grateful for. My family, which you got to see some of them running around there, my friends and my spiritual community. But after a while, saying thank you for the same handful of things over and over again becomes a bit repetitive. So I started looking for deeper reasons to be thankful for. And lately, one of the things that I've been feeling really grateful for is the blessing of being a human in this day and age. Of all the organisms on Earth, the chance to experience being human is really a blessing. We have so many unique gifts exclusive to our species. Take hindsight, for example. With it, I can trace the entire course of my life until this moment, and I can discover previously unseen patterns. I can see how my beliefs, my motivations, and my goals have evolved over the years. Now, when I do this, I can see a clear turning point in my life approximately 6 years ago, the start of a new perspective and approach to living. Whereas before I competed against other people and measured my own worth in relation to theirs, I now realize that there was only one person with which I should compete. Ernest Hemingway expressed it beautifully. There is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man and woman. True nobility is being superior to your former self. For the first time in my life, I was no longer focused on besting other people. I had turned at long last to the work of besting myself and being a better person than I had been yesterday. Now, with this came a more comprehensive approach to self-improvement. Whereas before I was always focused on being a better writer, a better husband or father, I now yearn to just be a better person overall. It occurred to me that previously, as I had focused on specific skills or aspects of my life, I had been falling for a bit of a ruse, because while I was focused on all of this, I was blissfully ignorant of my flaws and shortcomings. For me, this was a momentous discovery, a renaissance to the dark ages that preceded it. I was tapping into another one of humankind's great gifts, self-awareness, and the ability to reflect with honesty upon the state of my own soul. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, who is one of my ancient life coaches, he wrote the following: "Some people boast about their failings. Can you imagine someone who counts his faults as merits ever giving thought to their cure? So to the best of your ability, demonstrate your own guilt. Conduct inquiries of your own into all of the evidence against yourself." That was the advice that he gave to a friend. And when I put it into motion in my own life, I can tell you, I turned up a lot of evidence against me. And in my zeal, I rushed to a verdict without proper deliberation. I concluded that there were two distinct parts of me: a noble, refined self, capable of reason, honesty, and introspection, and a lower animal self, blindly guided by cravings and conveniently burdened with all the qualities I didn't like about myself. The good wolf and evil wolf of the Cherokee parable, or to speak in Jungian terms, the self and its shadow. Finally, I concluded that these opposing forces were indeed waging a battle inside of me, and that in order to become my best self, I had to vanquish the shadow, obviously. So today I'd like to tell you about my attempt to vanquish the shadow, and I'd like to share some of the lessons that I picked up along the way. Now, my goal, as always, is to provide a different perspective on a familiar topic. My hope is that you'll gain something beneficial from all of this, but I will stress that these are simply my most current hypotheses on the topic, so take it with a grain of salt. I'm not implying that it's true for everyone, but it certainly has been true for me up until this point. So, first, let's define the shadow, shall we? In the Cherokee parable, it's described as the embodiment of anger, envy, greed, arrogance, self-pity, resentment, and a whole laundry list of unsavory characteristics. We actually cut the list short when Nuria read it because it was just like on and on. You get the point, right? It's not the not so good stuff. So when I started to examine myself honestly, I found that my shadow embodied every single item on that list. But by and large, it was defined by one quality above all others. Now, if you take a moment to reflect on your own shadow, if you're familiar with it at this point, you may find that the same is true for you, that your wolf embodies one or two qualities more strongly than all the others that were listed. For me, that defining quality is anger. You could say that I'm a recovering rageaholic. Anger has been my lifelong companion, a natural and comfortable tendency that I indulged to the point of dysfunction. Now, at the height of my addiction, I even derived a sick pleasure from flying off the handle. There was something liberating about it, something even intoxicating. The usual considerations, other people's feelings, long-term consequences of my actions, these things dissolved in the presence of my anger, and in their place, a raging inferno burned brightly. Now, like other addictive substances, my anger brought its fair share of hangovers. Once the fire goes out and the smoke clears, I could see clearly the misdeeds, the hurtful words that I had dished out. Regret, guilt, shame, these things followed without fault every single time. And like many addicts, I was all too willing to incur these hangovers. Anger was my shield against insecurity and fear. It wasn't a problem. It was fuel, energy, motivation. It made me stronger. Or so I thought, and I told myself. But turns out I was like one of the people that Seneca just described, one who counts his faults as merits. So when I finally realized that anger is poison, corrosive and harmful to the one who experiences it above all others, well, that was a crushing blow to the shadow. My newfound understanding of anger coursed through me. I accepted it with every fiber of my being, felt the truth of it in my bones, and guess what? My angry reactions ceased to be. For 6 weeks, 2 months. My friends, I was flying high. I had just felled the shadow with a single blow. Mission accomplished. And then I had my first relapse. It was a minor thing, more frustration than anger, a pale shadow of my former tantrums and meltdowns. But even that little slip was too much to bear. How could I, who understood and accepted the negative repercussions of anger, allow myself to feel this toxic emotion? Doubt started to creep in. Maybe the serenity of the past 2 months had been a delusion. Maybe I had merely fooled myself into thinking my victory against the shadow was a sure thing. You've probably heard the expression, pride before the fall. If I ever write an autobiography, that might just be the title. After that first relapse, I went through the cycle many, many more times. And on each occasion, I remember thinking that victory was mine. Finally, I solved it. And that's usually when the shadow would spring out of its hiding place and drag me back down into the darkness for a quick reminder. I had to be reminded a lot, over and over again actually, until I finally started to catch on. The shadow was trying to teach me an important lesson. It was trying to point out a simple and inconvenient truth. You can't starve the evil wolf any more than you can lose your own literal shadow. Everywhere you go, it's behind you. It's always following. So with this in mind, I adopted a new strategy. I still want to grow and improve and become my best self, but I no longer view this process as an internal war between opposing forces. I'm not trying to destroy my shadow anymore. In fact, I'm embracing it. I'm saying, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge, is mine. I won't ever rid myself of imperfection, so rather than turn my back on it or fight certain aspects of my personality, I'm hugging my whole being tightly. If I'm saddled with these flaws, I might as well make them work for me instead of against me. If this weakness is a part of me, then by God, I will find a way to turn it into strength. I know it sounds crazy, like a contradiction of terms, but it makes perfect sense to me now. If I have to live with the evil wolf, maybe I can keep him on a short leash. Maybe I can tame this dysfunctional aspect of my personality so that it serves the whole, like a guard dog, instead of this ravenous beast that bites everyone in sight. As soon as I adopted this approach, my friends, the pieces started falling into place. Now, there are many ways that we can dissect the human mind and personality into little dichotomies. And each one of these dichotomies provides a really helpful model for understanding yourself. The Cherokee parable provides one such dichotomy, that of the self and its shadow. We can also talk about the rational and intuitive faculties of the mind, the feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche, conventional knowledge, and understanding derived from direct experience. These are all dichotomies. And for Carl Jung, who is another one of my life coaches, self-improvement is actually the integration of all of these opposites, the coming together of all of these dichotomies. Individuation, he calls it, the process of becoming a singular, unified individual, rather than this fractured, splintered, compartmentalized thing that I was. This can only be achieved by finding a measure of balance amidst the opposites. And this also happens to line up very nicely with the spiritual path laid out by Taoist sages, Lao Tzu and Shuangzi, as I like to say it. It's fun to say. You probably guessed these two individuals are also mentors of mine. And the way that they outlined reveals the complementary nature of opposites. They describe opposites as being inseparable. Black defines white. Up defines down. Truth defines falsehood. And as soon as you remove one, the other loses meaning. On the Taoist path, the goal is not to achieve one absolute over another, but rather to find a balance between all absolutes. Instead of being for this or against that, the Taoist sage strives to occupy the center, where affirmation and denial converge. The idea of destroying the shadow becomes ridiculous when viewed through this lens. Without shadow, there can be no light. Like yin and yang, self and shadow are aspects of the one. And so in retrospect, it seems to me that the Cherokee parable is a partial truth at best. No one that I know or have ever met is a pure embodiment of the good wolf. Even those I follow, these mentors I keep referring to, they were flawed and imperfect human beings, just like the rest of us. What I admire most about them is that they became aware of their imperfections and found ways to turn them into strengths. Now that's my goal as well. Perfection, as I previously understood it, as the embodiment of the good without the bad, is a myth. There's always a bit of good in the bad, a bit of bad in the good, and in any case, it seems to me that each person defines these terms differently. So what are we really talking about here? Well, Seen through the Taoist lens, the world is perfect, just as it is. Let go of all your assumptions, Shuangzi writes, and the world will make perfect sense. When nothing is left to argue with, and there is nothing to oppose, you will find yourself at peace and in harmony with all things. So these, then, are my findings based on these experiences that I've shared with you. When I ignored the shadow, it had total control over me. When I fought it for control, it went into hiding and learned to be cunning and deceptive. But when I finally embraced the shadow as my own self, I experienced a sense of peace and harmony with myself and with the world at large. In closing, I'd like to put forth a different metaphor for self-improvement and this so-called best self. Instead of envisioning an epic battle between two wolves, I'd like for you to picture an elaborate audio mixer, actually exactly like the one you have back there, in back your hall. If you haven't seen one, check it out after the service so you have an idea. Just don't touch the button. Although, good disclaimer. Although I will say that the metaphor involves touching all the buttons. So you've got a dozen channels, each with an assortment of knobs and dials, buttons and switches and so on. And as a sound technician, I'm sure you can tell us, your goal is to find the optimal configuration and produce the best quality sound for this venue. You adjust the bass and the treble, the highs and the lows, left, right, front, back, and you keep tweaking that until you find the perfect balance and you create the best quality sound for this room. So I'd like for you to think of your best self as this optimal configuration, the one that produces the best quality you there can be. Tweak the knobs and dials of your personality until you find the right balance between your masculine and your feminine sides, your thinking and your feeling, your light, and yes, even your darkness. Every day, keep on adjusting, listening, until you like what you hear and you find that sweet spot. And when you do that, do us all a favor, will you? Crank the volume up really high so that everyone can share in your perfect imperfection. Thank you.